Do you want to make visual effects that's sure to go viral on social media? Then watch this full tutorial where I show you my entire workflow. Like always, if you want to follow along with me, I have everything I use, including my blend file down below. Now, I've been having a lot of fun with branded content recently, so I thought I'd show you guys kind of a workflow that I've developed for kind of these product, placement, visual effects, advertising videos. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Again, I will have my entire blend file and all my After Effects files for you to download on my Patreon, so make sure to go support me there if you want. But let's go jump inside of Blender. Let's first open up the VFX motion tracking tab and open up our footage. Now, I went ahead and converted my footage to an image sequence, so let's hit A and open the clip. And then I want to go ahead and track the set scene frames and prefetch our footage, and then set our color management. Instead of AGX, which is the default, we want to set it on standard, just because that's the correct color space for video content like this. So let's just bring these windows down, and I want to go ahead and camera track my scene. Now, I'm not going to be going over all these settings I use into detail. I actually have a dedicated camera tracking video, so make sure to go check that out if you actually want to understand what each of the settings actually do. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to match the previous frame, normalize my footage, and then also set the correlation to 0.9. And then let's go ahead and detect some features on the first frame. I'm going to go ahead and set my threshold down, and then also the distance way down, just so we have a lot more markers that are actually tracking throughout our footage. And then let's Control-T, track those forward. You'll notice that some kind of go a little bit haywire, but we're going to go ahead and get all those out and get all the outliers out. So let's detect some features again, Control-Shift-T this time, and that'll actually track it backwards. And then now that we have the markers at the beginning and end, we also need some in the middle of our footage. So let's go to frame 100, detect some more features. Control-T, track them forward, go back to 100, Control-Shift-T, and track those backwards. Now we basically have just 3 sets of markers. Before I actually get a solve in my scene, I want to go ahead and try to get all these outliers as possible. Now, I just find clicking and deleting them is kind of the fastest way to do it on this graph section down here. You will see a lot of them are following this line, and so basically just all these above and below the line right here, we basically just want to delete, because those are markers that are going to be moving around and is going to lead to a backtrack. Now, if you know how to, select a lot of these kind of fast, please let me know. I couldn't really find anything online. I just found clicking and hitting delete on all these are kind of, the method that I use, but it can be annoying if there are that many, outliers like in this scene. So do let me know if you know any method to actually go ahead and mass select these to do it faster. Okay, so I went ahead and cleaned up the rest, and now you can see that we basically have some lines going right here, and all of them are within margin of error from each other. And some of these Blender might automatically delete just because they look like high error outliers, but we'll see and let Blender do that kind of calculation. So let's get our first solve. I'm going to come over here. The A and B keyframe is basically the range that's going to be the most amount of parallax into my scene, and in testing I found that 140 to 160 is kind of my range that works best for me, which is the range that kind of moved the most right here. And let's go ahead and refine everything and solve our camera motion. So we were able to get a 2.8 solve error, and that's actually pretty decent for our first solve error. Of course, we want to try to get that as low as possible. So let's go ahead and clean up the tracks. I'm going to click clean tracks, and then basically I'm just trying to push my reprojection error up until we're just selecting kind of the few top error tracks. So 3.3 for me, then delete those and solve our camera motion again. With just that one cleanup, we were able to get our solve error down to a 0.7, so that's really good. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the tracks a couple more times just to get that as low as possible. Okay, so I was able to get my solve error down to a 0.17, which is really good for this scene, so that is what I'm going to be sticking with. Very important, you do want to always kind of check that there's this blue line right here. It might be hard to see on YouTube, but on your thing, there's this blue line. You want to make sure that's as flat as possible throughout your entire range. That's actually the solve error line, and so we don't have any spikes in that, so that's really good. We have a consistent solve error, so we're actually ready to go ahead and set up our 3D scene. And so let's set up the background and 3D tracking scene. And let's go ahead and bring this window up down here. We don't need the graph anymore since we're ready to actually deal with a 3D. So let's join the areas right here. I just right click to do that. And now you can see that we basically have all these points, but we don't have it correctly rotated in our scene. And this is a part of the tutorial where it's a little bit finicky for this specific shot, because normally what we would do is come down here and there'd be a defined floor plane. And so we would tell Blender, hey, these 3 points are on the floor. Let's, rotate the scene so that these 3 points are on the floor plane at all times. And unfortunately, this scene does not really have a great set of points that are those reference for the floor. And so what we actually need to do is play around a little bit what I'm going to go ahead and do is I notice there are 3 points kind of on my floor plane. So like right here and then like 2 in the background. Let's go ahead and select those and see if we select 4. That's done a pretty decent job of actually selecting our floor. Of course, I do want to try to get that as accurate possible. So what I'm actually going to do is try to, manually rotate my specific scene to achieve that. And so let's come out to the layout section. First, before we do anything, Blender automatically set up some things I don't really like when we hit that setup tracking scene button. So let's go ahead and delete the foreground and background view layer, or sorry, collection down here, and then also the background view layer. And then if we come to the compositing tab, this is just kind of compositing back in the lens distortion. I'm not going to be doing this in this tutorial since that's more advanced for more meaningful shots with a wider field of view. So now that we have basically this scene set up, I want to come back out to layout. Let's go to the camera settings. This is just kind of what I like doing. Going to background images, changing the opacity all the way up, and then we very important, you do want to check render undistorted off since we're actually going to be modeling this in the scene. And so if we check that off, then we're not going to be having to deal with any kind of lens distortion or anything like that. So now let's talk about how to actually rotate the scene, since we got kind of 90% of the way there, but you can still see there's a little bit of a curve, or a tilt, sorry, to the actual scene right there. So let's just go ahead and start from scratch with just our camera. If I actually come up to the overlay section, we can enable the motion tracking, and now we can see in the 3D space, we can see all of our kind of points in midair. Of course, we will see in my original footage that there's this building right here. And if you think of buildings, they're basically always 90 degrees, and this one is no different. There's a little bit of geometry changes and stuff like that, so we're gonna have a lot of points that are kind of on top of each other and stuff. But for the most part, it's gonna be kind of a 90 degrees angle, and so we can use that 90 degrees angle to actually go ahead and rotate our scene and try to get that as accurate as possible. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, let's come out here. I want to set this camera to be basically so that the origin is where we're going to be modeling our building. So just with the camera selected, I'm going to move this G and just move that over here. So now it's closer to the center. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use basically this side of the building to basically be kind of reference for the model that we're going to use. And so what I'm going to do is Shift A, we're going to add a mesh cube, and then with that cube, let's just G, Shift Z, move it over here, and then if I scale it up, you will notice that it's very tilted, and so we need to go ahead and get that tilt out. First of all, what I want to do is these are way too distracting me right now, so I'm going to actually come and scale the size down just so we can see it a little bit nicer there. So in order to kind of get that tilt out, let's go ahead and bring another kind of scene out here, and then I'm going to come to the top view that's just hitting 7. And the idea is that we don't want to actually rotate the cube at all. We want the cube to remain kind of upright in the scene. We want to rotate the camera, and so let's go ahead. I want to set the cube right here in my scene so that basically the point right here is exactly on this little X and Y grid right there. And of course G, Shift Z, I'm just going to move that up, and let's do that. So now if I hold Z and go to wireframe, you'll see that we have this little line as reference. And again, we want that to be our up and down kind of axis right now. And so what I'm going to do is with the camera selected up here, we can go ahead and try to rotate that to match it as much as possible. And so right now I'm going to rotate it on the X, so RX, and you can see that we're getting much closer to that kind of edge now. And so let's go move it a little bit like that. And now you can see that's done a pretty good job. It's not perfect, so again, we do have to R, and I'm going to go X and try to get that as perfect right here. If you think about kind of what we're going to be doing, we're going to be putting some headphones in this area, and what we actually need the mesh for is to actually have shadows on our scene. And so just knowing, because I've already done this shot, and also just thinking about where I actually want the headphones, it's very important that we have kind of the upper section of the building modeled out as closely as we can. So what I'm actually going to do is select the cube and just move it kind of up here, and let's try to position this line exactly perfectly on this thing, which it's looking pretty good. It looks like it's just needs a little bit more of a kind of shift in the X direction, so somewhere like that. And that is looking pretty good for this section up here. And so that is pretty much all I'm going to do for the actual rotation of the scene. What we could do real quick actually is I do want to make sure that we check that the backside is looking good. So let's go to edit mode. I'm just going to move this kind of back here, and that is pretty good. You will see that this line up here is kind of tilted a little bit strangely, and so what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is let's select the camera again. I'm going to rotate on the Y this time, and I just want to try to match that line as much as possible now. And so let's move the camera down a little bit, and then let's go to the top view again, and I just want to kind of position that on the edge right there. And so yeah, basically we're just looking, if I select these lines, this line right here and then this line right here, we want to make sure that's kind of, you know, as accurate to the building as possible. Again, this is kind of just a very hacky way to do it, and let me know if there is a better way that you have found. I tried messing around with you know, defining a wall plane with you know, motion tracking settings, but after a little bit of trial and error, this should be good enough, since we don't need the model of the building supremely accurate to the actual scene. So once you're happy with the rotation, and it looks it's giving you something like this, you do want to make sure you kind of scrub throughout the footage, and it's looking like it's playing pretty well here. What I do notice is that the you know, kind of edge of my building is a little bit tilted, so if you come down here, you'll notice that my you know, it's basically, if I do this, it's basically my edge of my building is like that right now, and you can notice that by some of these points out here as my reference. And so I want to try to get rid of that as much as possible. So of course, to do that, let's just select my camera one more time, and then just rotate that on the top view like that. And now if we go ahead and delete this cube, we can now tell that it's basically around this area is the edge of the building. So now that we're you know, finally set up and ready to actually model, I know that was a little bit of a headache, and I'm sure there are much better ways to do it inside of Blender, but let's go ahead and add another cube. Love cubes today, and let's just position it right there. And the very important thing that we're doing right now is that we want to define kind of, you know, the building and make sure it's moving in line with you know, this cube and stuff, because that's going to be very important since we actually want to you know, put the headphones on the building and make it track to the building itself. So now you can see that the cube is following it pretty nicely. I will see that there's a little bit of rotational stuff, and so I didn't do a great job of you know, aligning my camera. So what I actually might do is just rotate it on the X, or sorry, let's do the Y. So the Y just a little bit, something like that. That looks pretty decent. So right about there is the edge of my building. Let's do it again. Okay, so that is looking good now. So let's go ahead and model out the building. Again, we just care really about this part up here. So let's come to edit mode by hitting tab. I'm going to come down here and just pull this kind of building down. And if I do kind of look at the building, we'll notice that it's basically has like a side of it cut out right here, and then like parts that jut out right here and here. So we need to kind of model that out as closely as possible. Let's go ahead. I'm just defining this kind of edge right here first, so we can use that as reference for the other ones. I'm going to go ahead and pull this one. Let's pull that all the way out to this edge right here. And then now that we have that, we can go ahead and define this kind of corner right here. So if I go ahead and Control R, we can add a loop cut, and I'm basically going to click right there and add a loop cut. And we want to align this line right at the edge of the actual corner there. And so now you can see this line is basically in the corner here. So now we have the edge of the building defined. So that is really good. Let's go ahead and I want to extrude this part out now. So let's E to extrude that. And again, I'm just kind of matching the corners. And so this line right here is the corner of my building right there. Of course, we do want to align this kind of edge as well. So what I'm going to do is come to the back here, just select these two faces, and let's G kind of X, yeah, X, just move that to the very edge. And so now we basically have the kind of corner piece right here, and this is the most important piece of the thing, since this is going to be where the shadow of our headphones are actually going to be projecting. And so I do want to kind of increase the height of this a little bit, so let's select these three faces and just G, Z, move those up. And so that is pretty much, you know, all the modeling that we need to do for this specific shot. You can get real advanced into, you know, modeling this out, like the crevices and stuff here, even the windows if you want to do that. One thing I do want to make sure is the side of this is kind of, you know, modeled out how it needs to be. what I actually do notice, sorry, is that there's like a little bit of curvature here, and so we're actually going to be using this side as kind of a holdout section, and so I do want to make sure I get that curvature in. So let's just select kind of these two edges right here, Control B to bevel that, and I just want to kind of bevel that a little bit in there, and then of course I can, you know, with a little bit of cheating, via VFX cheating. VFX is all about cheating, right? And so let's just bring that edge kind of there, and then we might, you know, make a new edge, Control R right here, and if I bring that out now to there, we can just try to mimic this edge as much as possible, just trying to play around with that edge. Because again, we are going to be using this as a mask, so just making it as accurate as possible is going to really help us not have to do a lot of roto work. And so that looks pretty good. We can now scrub through our footage just to make sure it follows it, you know, roughly pretty well. So you can see like down here, we can see the connection is actually following it really well and really nicely. Again, it doesn't matter too much that the edges aren't connected perfectly right here, because again, all these shadows can be up here. So now we are actually ready to add in the headphones. I know that was probably a lot of hassle, but trust me, just play around with it. Make sure your rotation is perfect before you do anything else, because if you throw off the rotation, then, you know, if that's not locked in place, then you're going to have a lot of headaches later on and a lot of backtracking. And so you do want to make sure that this edge is following very nicely for you, and for my scene, it's following perfectly fine. So now let's go ahead and add the headphones. Now there's a download link down below. You want to go ahead and download the blend file. And then once you have that downloaded, let's come to File and Append. It's an amazing model, by the way. I highly recommend you guys, you know, give a follow to the creator and all that. So let's go ahead and open up the blend file, go to Object, and then I'm just going to hit A and select all of these and append that in my scene. Before I select anything, I'm going to hit M on my keyboard to add to a new collection. I'm just going to call this Headphones for now. This is going to be where we're actually going to start to, you know, do some stuff for compositing different passes and all that. So now we basically have all this stuff. I don't need any of the lights that it kind of generated in the scene, and also the camera I don't need, since we already have our camera tracked, you know, to our footage. So we have this plane. Let's hit period to go down to that. And now you can see that basically this plane is our headphones, and all these other objects are parented to that. I believe this plane is just kind of an extra plane out here, so we can just go ahead and delete that. Then this plane I'm just going to rename to headphones obj for object, like that. And so now we have this object in our scene. Of course, we do need to scale it and put it so it's actually on the building itself. So let's just put that up here, and then I'm just going to scale that up. We can go to the side view to kind of get some of our measurements. And what I do want to go and do is this model is actually pretty nice, so I want to rotate out the headphones so that they're flat. So just going to come to the side view, and then rotate them out like that. Just select this empty, rotate it out so it's just flat, something like that. So that looks pretty good. And then we can select this one, and I just want to place it so they're basically on the building itself. So just scaling it down. Again, mostly we're concerned with this side, since this is the side closest to the camera. And so that is looking pretty good. And so now we can, you know, pretty much see what the final thing is going to be like. I might bring these down just a tad, so something like that, just to make it look a little bit nicer. But now you can see that we have basically our headphones on the building, and it's looking pretty cool. Of course, if I do go into render view, we can see that we have all this mess of stuff. We actually need to go ahead and start setting up some stuff to get a CGI render pass out. So let's do that. I'm going to come over and go to the Cycles render engine and set it to GPU compute, since if you do have a dedicated graphics, it's much faster to render on your GPU. Also, if you want to cut it up to edit and preferences, first of all, we need to go to the system tab. You want to make sure if you have an RTX card, you're running it on optics, and don't select the CPU, because if you select the CPU, it's actually going to be slower overall. You just want your GPU selected. Also, while we're here, we're going to be using some add-ons later. So if you come to the add-on section, you just want to make sure you type in Node Wrangler and make sure that this is checked. And then once you have all of that in order to actually save it throughout all of your Blender projects, you can just go ahead and save the preferences. So now let's come back out here. We can't see our footage, and so in order to get that back, let's go to the render properties, down to film, and set transparent on. Of course, we don't have any lighting in our scene, so I actually went ahead and downloaded an HDRI. Again, that is linked down below. So let's go to the color, gonna select this yellow button, go to environment texture, and then open that up. So here is the HDRI I'm gonna be using. I'm gonna open the image there, and now you can see that everything is being lit now. However, it's looking very bad and very blown out and stuff, and that's actually to do with the color space. Now if you remember, we switched it from AGX to standard before, and that's actually because the standard transform is the best for videos and image sequences and stuff like that. Now that we're actually working with the physical 3D objects and the CGI, the best kind of color space to be in is the AGX transform. And so let's go up to the render properties and all the way down to color management, and again we want to go from view transform instead of standard. We want to be on AGX, and now you can see everything is looking much better and it's not as blown out as it was before, which is going to lead to a lot more data that we can actually use for compositing. So let's go ahead and rotate the sun because it's not in the right section. So I'm going to come to the shader editor. Go up to world. I'm going to hit in to hide that panel, and then since we downloaded the node wrangler add-on, we can go ahead and hit this Control T to add a texture coordinate and mapping node. All the node wrangler does is just add a bunch more kind of shortcuts and quality of life features to nodes that honestly should be default by now, but that's another story for another time. Let's go ahead and rotate the scene. If I come to my footage, I will notice that a lot of the sun is coming this way and basically coming down, and so we want to try to mimic that as much as possible. So if I come over here, let's just rotate that until it's basically a similar direction. So something like that. That looks pretty good and matches, the other rotation might see. So for me, it was negative 155, but of course you just kind of want to mimic that rotation and stuff like that. So now we need to go ahead and talk about how to get the shadow. And so first, before I do anything, you will notice that this is a white material. We don't want white material because white is very reflective and it also doesn't match the material of the actual building. And so now you can actually go in and project the texture onto our object and stuff, but that's a little bit more involved, specifically for this scene, since there's not that many reflections in this model that we have. We don't really need to do all of that. And so what I want to do is I just want to make it a solid non-reflective color. And so let's go ahead and add a new material. I'm just going to name this building, and all I'm going to do, keep it super basic, is change the base color into the color of this building right here. Also, I want to go ahead and change all of the reflection data off. So let's go back to object and down to roughness. I want to change the roughness up and then the specular down a little bit, since this building is a very kind of rough material and wouldn't be reflecting a lot of reflections other than the windows, of course. So now that we have kind of this set up, we need to go ahead and set a new collection up here. Since we already have the headphones collection, we can turn that on and off, and it basically turns off the headphones. We need to have the same accessibility for the building itself. So this cube is actually our building, so I'm just going to name that. Let's go ahead and right click, add new collection. Of course, I'm just going to name that building as well, and then place our building object into the collection. And so now that we have that, we can turn this building on and off as well. One thing I do want to point out before we take a step further is that if I actually go ahead and turn the building off, you'll see that we can see the back of our kind of headphones right now. If I turn that back on, you can see that our building is actually obstructing it. And so what we want to do is we basically want to break our passes, our CG into two passes. One where it's just the headphones and everything, and then the second where it's just the shadows of the actual object with a transparent background. And so in order to do that, that might sound very complicated, and it's actually really not. Inside of Blender, it's actually a really kind of easy thing to do inside of Blender. So let's go ahead and we have these kind of view layer settings up here. What I want to go and do is for this view layer, let's go ahead and name these headphones. And what we can do then is click this button and add a new view layer, and we'll name this shadow. And so view layers are basically just duplicates of your scene that you can turn off different collections in order to render out different things that you might need. And so, for the headphones collection, for example, we will just want basically these headphones and then not the building. Of course, if I do turn the building off, we can still see the other side. And so what we need to do is we first need to set up the building to only receive shadows and not actually be seen by its color. And so that's super easy. Let's go to the object properties, down to visibility. We just want to select this shadow catcher, and now it's doing exactly what we want. We can still see that we have some, shadows and stuff over here. However, we don't see, this little section of the headphones since it's actually obscuring that. And so that's really good. Of course, this is why we need it super accurate on this side. So for any reason yours is kind of, looking wonky over there, you do want to kind of move the model around until it's perfectly on that edge throughout the entire shot. Now in my, original video, I think I had the things a little bit lower. And so we're going to have to deal with some of the masking and stuff up here. I didn't want to get too advanced into, the modeling and stuff up there, especially with my camera track, since it's not the most accurate thing to this building. And so this is what I'm going to leave it as, but of course play around with it for your own scene. So now we basically want to have this view layer just be our headphones. So I'm just going to join the area so we can view this a little bit easier. So if I go ahead and turn the building off, you can still see that we're having that problem again. So what we basically need to do is we need to tell this pass that we don't want the buildings to be seen, but we still want the buildings to basically obscure everything that's behind it. And so what we can do is I'm going to select this mode up here. We're going to toggle the holdout section and the indirect only section. So what those sections do is basically gives us the ability to tell these collections to perform different tasks. And so for this one, for the building, I'm going to set it to be a holdout. And so now you can see that we're basically having the headphones right here. However, we're not having that shadow as we did before. So if I turn that back on, we can see that we have our shadows right here. But if I turn that off, we don't have the shadows. But it's still giving us our occlusion of our little our headphone ear piece over here. So that's exactly what we want to do. We basically just want this to act as our headphones. And if I actually come out here, this is all it's doing. It's basically taking the object, and anything that's behind the object is actually not going to be rendered. It's going to be rendered as an alpha channel. And so that is looking good. Let's go over to our shadow view layer now. And we basically need the opposite. We basically need to have the headphones not being able to be seen, but the shadow only. Of course, if I turn headphones off, nothing is seen because the headphones are actually affecting the environment. So that's where the indirect only pass comes in. So let's go ahead, and I want to turn that on, which is that button right there. And now you can see that we're basically having the headphones give everything that it indirectly affects, so such as shadow, reflection, all of that stuff. And that is what is being projected on our building kind of thing over here. And so that is exactly what we want. You can see out here that it's basically just going to give us an alpha channel with our shadow in the middle. Of course, you do want to make sure that this shadow layer looks as good as possible. So what I might do is let's go to the building, and then I want to select some of these edges. The nice thing with in real life materials and stuff like that is that no surface is ever perfectly flat on the edge. If it would cut you and stuff like that. So what we can actually do is Control B, and that'll basically bevel. And then if you use your mouse wheel, you can add more or less edges. I just like doing a few, like right here. And so now you can see we have a nicer kind of fall off for our shadow. You can of course shade smooth just so it's even nicer like that. And so now we have a very nice kind of fall off for these angles. I'm also going to do it in the kind of inside right here, and then we'll do one for the outside right here. And so again, that kind of just helps the fall off around the corner a little bit there. And so, play around with that, get a result that you like. Let's go ahead and render these out so we can actually composite them back together inside of a program of choice. I'm going to be using After Effects for today's tutorial, since that's the most user-friendly and kind of, bare bones program for these types of shots. Of course, I would normally use Nuke for my compositing, since I believe that that is a better program than After Effects. However, Nuke has a higher barrier of entry with its price, and also the learning curve is much steeper. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to the compositing tab, and I'm going to go ahead and delete the movie clip and alpha over nodes, since we're not going to be compositing anything inside of Blender. Now we have this render layers nodes. We can see that we have our headphones view layer right now. I'm going to Shift D, duplicate that down. Of course, we want to change this to shadow. And if I'm holding Shift Control and then clicking, we can add a viewer node and move around that. We're not seeing anything now, and that's actually because we haven't rendered out a single image yet. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit render and render image. Okay, so once we get a black screen, we can exit out of here and then go into our passes. So this is exactly what I'm wanting. I'm wanting a headphones with this part cut out and transparency in the background. And then for our shadow, we want this where it's basically transparency with some black shadowing right here. Now let's go ahead and render this out. To do that, we can hit Shift A. I'm going to add a file output node, and this node is basically going to replace our composite node if you've ever used that inside of Blender, which means that we can have multiple kind of things being rendered at once instead of having to render out one full pass and then changing a bunch of settings and then render out the whole other pass. It's going to save us a lot of time, and we can let this thing render overnight if need be. So let's go to the file output node. I'm going to go to the node properties right here. And let's go ahead, and I'm going to be rendering as PNG. Of course, you could be rendering as OpenEXR. All we need is just a RGB channel, an alpha channel, so we can actually have that transparency in the background. Now, since PNG is a lossless format, I'm going to be keeping it on 15%. Of course, choose a base path where you want this to render into. But now we need to add another input since we're going to have two passes for this specific tutorial. You can name those whatever you want. I believe I just named my headphones, then underscore, and then we can go and do the shadow underscore. Underscore is just to separate the main body of our text from the actual frame numbers that it's going to produce. So of course, now that we have that, we have two kind of connections right here. So I want to connect the image of my headphones in there, and then the image of my shadow in there. Now this is where you can do some compositing before the fact. Usually sometimes I'll denoise my final render, so if you want to do that for whatever reason, say I want to denoise my headphone pass, we can go here, go to the view layer properties, go to denoising data right there, and now we have all this other data that Blender automatically generates. So I'm going to go ahead and Shift A, add a denoise node, place it there, place the normal and the albedo in the correct sockets. And what that's going to do is basically render out our pass, and then on top of everything at the very end, it's going to run it through an AI denoiser to get out any possible noise, which is very important for CGI. We want no noise as possible, so we can add noise after the fact. So that is looking good. Of course, you do want to name your file path and make sure all of your settings are correct, but I believe it should be. It's a 1080p, 24 FPS, even though we're rendering as a PNG sequence, so that shouldn't really matter your FPS. So now that we have that, we can finally come up here and render the animation. Okay, in the home stretch now. I know this is a longer tutorial, so I'm glad that you guys are sticking with it, and hopefully it'll lead to a cool result. So inside of After Effects, of course, if you do want to follow along in another program of choice, just do your own kind of translation between this program and others. It should be pretty simple to follow along if you know your own personal program. So let's go ahead and import in everything, of course. So I'm going to import multiple files in. I'm going to select this first pass of, I named it RGBA since that's how Nuke works. But basically your headphone pass, you just want to select that, make sure PNG sequence is selected, and import that in. And then let's do the same thing. It should be in the same folder if you did the file output node. We want the shadow pass as well. So let's import that in. And then finally, I want to locate my footage. And so here is my footage. We can import that in and hit done. Now it automatically recognizes it as 30 FPS since we don't have an FPS tied to it, since it's an image sequence. I believe my original video was filmed in 24 FPS, so we just had to right click, interpret footage, go to main, and we'll see this window down here. We just want to change that to 24 frames per second. So again, right click main, 24, not 25, and then right click, interpret main, 24. So now all of these are 24 FPS. Let's go ahead and drag our building PNG and make a new composition. And then of course we do need to put in our headphone layer and then our shadow layer. So first thing we need to do is let's go ahead and composite the shadow in. Now this is just kind of the default pass that it rendered outside of Blender. What I actually like doing is using the actual pixel data of the footage to influence the shadow instead of this, just black mess right there. So what I actually like doing is let's go ahead and Control C, Control V. I want to copy and paste this layer to basically give it a duplicate. Now, if we see this track matte settings, if you don't see that, just toggle these switches in mode at the very bottom right here. But what that is basically going to take the alpha of whatever kind of layer we tell it to and apply it to this layer, so it's only affecting that specific layer. So let's go ahead and select the track matte to be our shadow kind of view layer right here, and now you'll see our shadow has basically disappeared. But all it's done is, if we kind of hide this layer at the bottom, is it's using the alpha of the shadow layer and basically applying that to this layer. And so whatever we do to this layer, it's only going to basically affect this section. Think of it as a simple mask. And so what we can do now is, with this layer, I'm going to go to Effect and down to Color Correction, and I like using the Levels tool for this specific shot. And I'm going to bring this output white, and I'm just going to bring that all the way down until it kind of matches around here. And let me zoom in, and you can see that what it's doing. You can see it's basically taking those kind of mid-range values of these buildings and stuff like that, and getting those down, and that looks much better and matches much more closely, you can see, to kind of this edge right here. What I do notice is that there's a little bit more of a blue slash green hue over here, so I want to try to mimic that. Let's add a little bit of blue back into this. So I'm just going to increase the gamma of the blue ever so slightly there. So now you can see that it's basically just introducing some blue hues there. I might also go to the green section and just do green ever so slightly, not too much since we don't want a lot, but now you can see that I'm matching it much more closely to the actual shot, and it actually looks integrated into our scene now. And so that is the shadow kind of done. Now let's get into the actual compositing of the headphones, which is also pretty easy. I'm going to be using that same effect, so let's go to color correction, let's go to levels, and then of course I just want to play around with the different channels. So let's go to the red channel first, and then before we do anything, let's go set the black level, because if we see the blackest level of this, it doesn't match the blackest level of our actual footage. So I want to try to match it as closely as possible. The blacks are a little too dark for my liking here. So what I might try to do is just take this and push it ever so slightly here. So now you can see we're just basically lightening our blacks. And so now that we have that, now we can go into the different channels. So I'm going to go into the red channel up there and the red channel here. And now if we move around this gamma slider, we can, individually affect the channels. And so basically just eyeballing it now, seeing what feels right. This isn't really the most technical way to kind of color match, but it's the way I find to get a pretty good result in a fast amount of time. So I'm just going throughout the channels and making sure to switch it up here and also down here so we're viewing the right channel. So finally with the blue, I'm just going to push it up ever so slightly there. So now let's go back out to RGB in both and see what that is doing. So here is what we had before. We basically had the compositor right out of Blender, and then we were able to get this result and color match it a little bit more. If I actually zoom in a little bit, we will notice that the headphones are a little bit too in focus, and so what we want to do is kind of blur it a little bit to get it back out of focus to match the building right here. So let's go to blur and sharpen, camera lens blur, and then I believe I use like a 0.2 blur right there. And so let's see, if we just turn that on and off, it might be hard to see on YouTube, but if you just get real close into the object, it matches kind of the blurriness of the actual building. So that is looking good. Okay, so some final touches now. We do need to kind of, mask out this section up here. Now, there are many ways to do that. What I'm actually going to do is a luminance key. So let's go ahead and figure out how to do that. I'm going to Control C, Control V, duplicate the bottom. Let's put it at the very top, just so we have basically another duplication of our thing at the very top. And what we're going to be doing is basically creating what's called a holdout. If you remember in Blender, we actually set our collection to be a holdout. However, here you can think of a holdout as basically we're going to cut this kind of part of the building out and then paste it on the very top of everything above our visual effects. And so if we notice, the sky is actually much brighter than this building right here. So what we can actually use is what's called a luminance key. And all that is basically it's going to take the luminance value of every pixel and then subtract all of the lighter values, only leaving the darker values. And so if you come over here, you can just type in Luma. I already have it over here, so I'm just going to drag and drop it into my effect controls. And you can't see that it's done out anything yet. We actually need to go ahead and change it. Instead of keying out the darker, which is going to be our building, we want to do the opposite. We want to key out the brighter. And of course, that is, getting this result. We do want to play around with this threshold. So if I start to bring this up, you can see some of the darker values kind of slowly creep in to our thing. We just want to keep pushing this up until it basically just has our, building right here. So that is looking pretty good and pretty accurate. What you can see now is it's, doing a lot of stuff down here. So we basically just want to tell that this layer only affects this specific area around here. And that's super easy. All we're going to do is come up and select the pen tool and create a super simple mask. So I'm just going to select this, click and drag, just selecting kind of a mask section out here. Something like this. The less points, the better. And then, click it back in here. So now you can see that we have our other headphones and stuff back. And if I kind of, solo this layer, you can see this is all that it's doing. It's basically taking the luminance key value and then creating a mask around that section and then pasting it at the very top above everything. And so let's go ahead and turn some of our layers back on, and we have this thing now. Let's go ahead. We do need to animate this mask to go kind of throughout our entire footage. So let's come down here to the mask section. We want to make sure mask path is, highlighted right there. The time stop watch right there. That's just a keyframing, so we can actually animate it. Let's come to the very end, and I'm going to go ahead and place it right here. Or let's actually come here. I need to select that, and then now we can play around with this mask. Now we do want to be messing around with the mask and not the actual translation data of the actual layer, because you might run into problems if you do that. And so that looks pretty good. We'll come to the middle here, kind of mess around with this a little bit, something like that. Okay, so let's just scroll through our entire thing, making sure that that is looking pretty good, and that does do a good job, and so we are all good there. What you could do is you could leave this as kind of its own layer. What I like doing is just kind of having one, kind of layer and not this, not things stacked on top of each other. It's just kind of personal preference for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to use this layer as a mask. And so for my RGB, then remember this is my headphones layer. So if I turn that on and off, that's my layer. Let's do another track matte. I'm going to place that to be our building again. And it's basically doing the opposite of our effect. It's placing that the headphones on top of our building. So let's just invert that. And it's basically doing the same exact thing. But now we don't have basically another duplication of a layer on top of, one another. Since I've had times where sometimes I'll accidentally nudge this top layer and I won't notice it until the very end. And so it's always just nice to have this only being affected as a mask, basically, for our main CG layer. So final thing that we have to do, of course, is to go ahead and, match the grain of our footage onto the headphones. And so let's go ahead and do that. Let's add an effect. I'm going to go to noise and grain, and match grain is what I like using. Super simple like that. Let's place the preview window over here for now, just so you can see what that's doing. And that is way too much. And so what we need to do is first noise source layer, of course, is going to be our very base footage. So that's usually the last kind of, layer in our sequence. And then let's go ahead. It's still way too much for me. You'll notice that it doesn't really match. There's not a lot of grain in the other kind of darker spots over here. So let's go to the tweaking tab, and I believe I set my intensity down to a 0.3. And so now if you kind of turn that on and off, you can see a little bit of grain, and it matches much more closely to the actual shot. Let's change this instead of preview to final output, just so it's affecting everything. And now we are actually ready to render out the final visual effects shot. I know it's been a long process, but we're now finally ready to render it all out. So let's go up to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Of course, you can mess around with these settings, clicking these blue buttons. It's automatically set to H.264, which is totally fine for me. Let's hit Not Yet Specified to actually set a file location. And then once that is all ready and you are ready for a final render, we can come over here and hit the render button. Okay, so here is the final result that we got from this tutorial. Hopefully you guys got something similar or learned a thing or two on the way. Now this was a super fun shot to do, and if you do make anything similar, make sure to tag me, as I'd love to see what you guys create. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.